Hello, my name is Alexander Kyiv. Welcome to the program. Ukraine's relations with its western neighbor Hungary has significantly deteriorated in the recent years for numerous and complex reasons. Tensions in political and social ties between the two countries have worsened bilateral relations to the point it became a sensitive topic. Now a roundtable organized by the International Center for Policy Studies, together with the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade from Hungary, was held in Kyiv to find solutions to this problem. What are the reasons behind it, and which diplomatic strategy can be put in place to re-establish good relations between the two neighbors? Joining us today in our studio to expand on this topic is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Hungary in Ukraine, Mr. István ÍJGYÁRTÓ. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So first question. You were there at the roundtable this morning.
Yes.
What are the main outcomes? How would you rate this event?
I think the result is beyond my expectations, because I expected a little bit more frozen atmosphere, thanks to the introduction you also made to the present stage of relations. But it was surprisingly relaxed and surprisingly focusing on the real problems. I think it was very honest to name and identify those elements of the conflict, if there is any, between Ukraine, referring very much and putting an accent on that it's never been like this. So originally the Ukrainian-Hungarian relations were excellent, in a very friendly manner, and somehow we try to identify those events which contributed to the cooling of the relations, and also the possible outcomes, how you can repair those relations.
We will delve into the reasons for this conflict and more complicated relations, and the strategy a little bit after. But first, I want to point out an important question. Why is it important now? Would you say that there's some sort of a reset of relations between Hungary and Ukraine? Because Prime Minister of Ukraine for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Dmytro Kuleba, said earlier today, quote, "I can say that when President Zelensky was elected, we were talking with the Hungarians in Strasbourg, and they were sending clear signals of readiness for dialogue." Would you say there's a new era of relationship here?
Actually, I'm quite convinced that continuously Hungary was open for this kind of, repairing or renewing the relations with Ukraine, because we think, due to the traditions and due to the previous era, that this is an unnatural thing between two neighbors. And Ukraine is definitely one of the most important neighbors, and definitely the biggest neighbor in Hungary's vicinity. So that's why we want to go back to that tradition, that we have at least excellent relations with Ukraine, and continue those cooperations which unfortunately slowed down, or it even a little bit died out during the last maybe 1.5 to 2 years. So it's an unnatural process, and we are very much grateful to the Ukrainian partners of the forming new cabinet and the president's people, that they also realize that they should focus a little bit more on the neighborhood, including Hungary.
Now, was it important to wait until the election of President Volodymyr Zelensky for a renewal of faces for that? Because when we point out a certain, does that mean also a change of attitude? Because Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, because he used to say back in 2018 that it was quote impossible to reach new agreements with leaders of Ukraine. So was it important to wait for new leaders in Ukraine to renew that?
Actually, since, you know, the two particular legislation which started to cause problems in the bilateral relations, especially the famous education law, which was adopted in 2017, and later, most recently, the so-called language law. This was, of course, prepared and voted by the Parliament of Ukraine, which, since, you know, the legislative power is very strong in a normal democracy, is determined very much what kind of room to maneuver remained for the government or even the previous president. So I think at least the parliamentary elections were necessary to, how to say, to rethink some aspects of these problems between the two countries. And we detect a willingness from the new parliament and accordingly from the new government that we should sit down and identify those elements of which caused a certain crisis in our bilateral relations.
Because it wasn't the only problematic statement from your Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. It was also in 2018 when he said, quote, I don't envisage their membership of NATO, and the prospect for their EU membership are virtually zero. So thus, at this point in time, instead of a Ukrainian state, I see Ukrainian economy increasingly drifting towards debt slavery. These are harsh words towards Ukraine.
Indeed. However, I have to say that the Prime Minister put it actually to a broader context. So, of course, it's always a kind of defense that it was quoted about a bigger piece of text. But he was talking about what kind of approaches nowadays we detect towards Ukraine. And he said that, however, sometimes the international community expresses its support towards Ukraine, everybody knows that under the recent conditions it is very hard to believe that Ukraine very soon can join to some international relations due to the conflict with the neighbor and the situation caused by that. So he said that it is sometimes better to frankly talk about what are we thinking and how can we help regardless to the situation, than to smile into the face of a partner and in the same time knowing something totally or thinking totally different.
Now, we do have a fragment that we're going to ask a soundbite and fragment of an interview of Voice of America with Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó from July 17. Let's take a listen.
Okay.
We have always expressed our solidarity in practical terms as well. Since 2013, Hungary is delivering gas to Ukraine on a reverse flow basis, although it's very risky for us since we get 100% of our imported gas from Russia. We have given treatment to 37 Ukrainian troops who have been injured in the war. And this year we're gonna provide such kind of treatment for 20 additional troops. So far there were 2,200 Ukrainian kids since 2016 having holidays in Hungary, expenses covered by the Hungarian state, whose parents have been involved in the fights in the east. So we have made our best to support Ukraine in this regard. You know, the question is never to lift the sanctions. The question is to roll on the sanctions. And we have never vetoed so far, and I think this is a very clear answer to your question.
Now, what's your stance on this declaration?
I think the minister referred to those sometimes unfounded allegations that Hungary mostly concentrates on Zakarpattia when supporting Ukraine is concerned. It's indeed true that there is a robust support which we provide for the region, not necessarily only to the Hungarian minority, because in some cases where 10% Hungarians living in the town and we are contributing to the renewal of a medical facility, it's obviously not only for the Hungarians but for anybody who is living in that area. But also we deem it necessary to express this solidarity towards those who are really suffering from the consequences of this military conflict with the neighbor. Actually, this is a great honor to receive those heroes from Donbass who injured, and it's mostly a post-traumatic or post-war injury kind of treatment which we provide for those soldiers. And also for, the minister missed to mention that those children who are coming to visit Hungary for summer holidays, they are mostly coming from ATO veteran families. So it is also a kind of contribution. I just want to mention, we don't want to say it all the time and don't want to advertise it all the time. I'm, for instance, traveling on Monday to Severodonetsk, because not far from the famous Stanica Luhanska, there is a small village, Valyuki, where there is a medical center which actually covering, for instance, the checkpoints, traffic, and if somebody gets ill or has a heart attack or something, they provide the medical treatment. And it's in a very bad shape. So we are about to sign a contract that the total renovation and the surplus so technical conditions will be provided by the Hungarian government. So we, of course, not doing a big, how to say, sensation about it, but we try to do our best to assist Ukraine in this very, very difficult condition.
Now, well, we have to address the elephant in the room, unfortunately, a little bit. Zakarpattia.
Okay.
This is one of the core, the place where there's one of the core issue of this conflict between Hungary and Ukraine. So there was this controversial, as you said, language law in 2019 that where Hungary felt its community in Ukraine being threatened, its culture in Ukraine being threatened, and then retaliated by threatening to stop Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Then in 2018 also there was this video which was posted where some Hungarian officials gave some Hungarian passports to Ukrainian citizens, but dual citizenship is forbidden in Ukraine. Now here's how hard it is to find the balance between, let's say, Hungary willing to preserve and protect its minority without being suspected of separatism by Ukraine, which is a touchy topic here, especially because of the war.
Yes, I understand. Look, I emphasized it during the roundtable that. We have quite a short history with the independent Ukraine, but most of the time of this common history as democratically and independently born Hungary and Ukraine, the conditions of the bilateral relations were excellent. And from the beginning, it was even Ukraine, which was not yet an independent country, but it was a socialist republic. But the Ukrainian diplomacy made their first independent moves. We signed a declaration on the protection of minorities. So minorities always been somehow in a positive matter a subject of our cooperation up to this unfortunate education law in 2017. We established the first mixed committee with Ukraine on the protection of minorities, where the minorities could be represented. So they had almost the same negotiating level like the two governments. It was sometimes the Ukrainian-Hungarian cooperation was a model for us negotiating with other countries where we had even more bigger problems with the minorities, like, for instance, Romania in the 90s or Slovakia in the 90s. So I would like to say that so far the Ukrainian-Hungarian cooperation in the fields of minorities were exemplary. That's why we were shocked and surprised, and definitely the Transcarpathian Hungarians were shocked and surprised that this kind of attitude started. And basically, not necessarily, the restriction of certain rights, but the whole attitude that the minorities, because of the unfortunate events in the Crimea and in the Donbass, became suspicious that so if you belong to a minority and if you are fighting for your rights, and for your survival as a community, you are absolutely a secessionist or
you might be a danger.
So you comprise a danger to the state of Ukraine and the unity of Ukraine. So this kind of attitude. So when you are dealing with not education experts, but maybe agents of the secret services who are observing you, that why you are doing this and that. So it's not necessarily raising the comfort of a community. Of course, there is not irreparable things. Nobody never argued in Zakarpattia that it's a necessity to learn the Ukrainian language in a proper way by every and each citizen of Ukraine, including the members of the Hungarian minority. But still for 20, I don't know how many years, there were an argument between the education ministry and the local community that how it can be taught, are there the necessary material, the pedagogical stuff and this and that, which is unfortunately still not proper. So we have a law which obliges, Ukrainian state to provide a much more reinforced Ukrainian education, but you don't have those who will be able to produce this. So therefore, even we are contributing through the Berehovo higher education facilitation, which is the high school. For example, they organized the Ukrainian language course for adults, not only children, but for adults who never could learn Ukrainian properly because they lived in the Soviet period. So no argument on that. The main concern of the Hungarian community was the future of the education network as such. So they inherited from the minority status in Czechoslovakia, later in the Soviet Union, and in the first absolutely positive years of the Ukrainian independence. And somehow by the stipulation of this law, this system of schools became in a how to say, very volatile situation, since the law is not talking about schools, it's talking about only classes and groups for the minorities. So this, I think, the main concern, not it's never been a question that the Ukrainian language should be taught.
So the devil, I would say, devil is in the details on that point.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to my next question: what kind of diplomatic means, political means, maybe economical means also, can be put in place to get out of this quid pro quo?
I think even along with the so-called minority problem, which has its fora in our governmental structure, unfortunately we not properly used it, because even between the two the legislative power agencies, like the two parliaments, there is a mixed committee for minority issues. Unfortunately, we were not using it. Or there is the Intergovernmental Commission, which I mentioned. Even there is as far as I learned, there is a new agency in the new Ukrainian government which will deal with them. So there are so many opportunities to exchange professional views. But in addition to this, we have a huge pile of issues we have to approach. Infrastructure, which is absolutely necessary, because regardless of the minorities' presence in Zakarpattia, there should be a 21st century connection between Ukraine and Hungary. As to the border crosses and the motorway connection is concerned. Otherwise, we are not able to develop or mutually interested economic relations. Can you imagine that we are talking about worse and bad relations, and still we have $4 billion trade exchange between the countries? I was quite happy when President Zelensky went to Turkey and noted that with Turkey, which is much bigger than Hungary, they have $4 billion. I said that we are here, so we are in the neighborhood and we have the same money. So it underlines that there is still a huge potential in our bilateral relations. We have to develop, the infrastructure. We have to develop the mutual work of those ministerial and other levels where we can pass to Ukraine a lot of very bitter, sometimes bitter experiences we developed after the crisis in 2008, 2009, and so on. We understand that there is a very strong will from the Ukrainian side to make enormous steps forward to develop the economy. We can talk with Ukraine about taxation reform. We can talk with Ukraine with these sometimes revolutionary economic reform steps we made, how to attract more FDI, how to attract more investment to Ukraine as such, because Hungary had to go through this process, and we are very much ready to share this with our Ukrainian partners, including that there are so many Hungarian companies who are waiting for the opportunity to invest to Ukraine. So in addition to besides this minority problem, which is, of course, still not losing any kind of interest from both sides, I suppose. We have a long list of issues we should go forward. And I think it's as much as a priority as the consensus on the minority field.
Now, on a more personal note,
Sure.
let's say, you come from Beregszáz, Berehove, which is the heart of this Zakarpattia/Transcarpathia Hungarian community. How does it influence your work as an ambassador, and what do you expect at the end of the day from this?
It's how to say, it's somehow a not very typical story of mine, which is related somehow to this discussion, the most interesting discussion, because my parents then in '76 decided to leave then the Soviet Union, because there was a wave then of Sovietization in Zakarpattia, and I was in the Hungarian minority school when they wanted to introduce Russian. We learned Russian, I think, maybe eight hours a week, but they wanted to change the school into a Russian-speaking school. So my parents realized that probably there is no education and other perspectives in Zakarpattia for those who belong to the Hungarian minority, and they decided to go to Hungary. It was quite a difficult process. Basically, most of my adulthood I spent in Hungary. I'm an honorary member of the Zakarpatska Uhorska community, but basically I became a Hungarian citizen in Hungary, and started even my studies and the diplomatic career there. Of course, it makes me probably a little bit more sensitive to the problem, but during my unfortunately too long career, it's almost more than 30 years, my God, I realized that you have to switch off your personal emotions, and you have to switch on those skills which makes you a good diplomat. But in the same time, of course, understanding better the region, Ukraine itself, of course, my experience and my instincts are helping me very much. And I definitely use them, approaching with the maximum openness the Ukrainian-Hungarian relations.
Well, thank you very much for opening up on this issue, on your own personal history, and also all these issues, and explaining a little bit this complex and nuanced situation that is the Hungarian.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That was István ÍJGYÁRTÓ, Ambassador of Hungary to Ukraine. Thank you for watching the program, and stay tuned for the rest.